Welcome to the first of a series of 10 videos that are being put together by Community Energy Wales to look at retrofit in Wales. My name is Peter Draper and I am a retrofit coordinator and director of the Sustainable Traditional Buildings Alliance. I'm also a building surveyor and a domestic energy assessor. So my role in these videos is to guide you through sort of the background to retrofit and how things are changing and the sorts of ideas and concepts that lie behind a new way of doing things, especially in Wales. We're not going to be able to give you all the solutions in these videos because every house is different. So you will need an individual plan, but I shall get onto that as we progress. So one of the key things to understand within this area and this field of work is that we can look at sort of mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is trying to just sort of slow our carbon emissions and hopefully slowly eradicate them. Or at least in a net zero manner. So what can we do about that? And adaptation is all about, well, our climate is already changing. You know, we see more flooding, we see more sort of storms, and we're seeing warmer summers. So how do we adapt our existing housing stock to ensure that we still have a reasonable and comfortable future using that stock? But I think it's key at this point to sort of really emphasise that retrofitting the Welsh building stock is not an easy fix. So, you know, when we travel up the South Wales valleys, you know, we see and we expect to see, you know, rows of terraced housing. When we're in mid Wales, we see sort of smaller towns, and we see sort of farmsteads, you know, built out of, you know, local stone, etc. And in North Wales, similar, where we have, you know, the slate quarries, and we have houses made of slate, you know, in those different areas. So each region has its own characteristics, partially defined by its urban landscape. You know, in Wales, we have something called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Now, in this sort of scenario, it doesn't really affect, at the moment, the private rented sector, so those people who are renting their properties and the landlords associated with that, or the people who own their sector. But it does have some influence on councils and people like housing associations who receive monies from government, because they have to adhere to it. So for those people, you'll see on screen now that the wellbeing goals and the ways of working that are associated with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So anything that is going to attract monies or support from the government needs to answer those questions of being, does it contribute towards a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a more equal Wales, a healthier Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, and also a land of vibrant culture and Welsh language, but also one that's globally responsible. So when we start looking at retrofit, some of those goals are really key. Certainly when we start looking at being globally responsible, but also culturally responsible and thinking about health and how we actually go about doing retrofit in Wales. And the way that we do things in Wales is dictated and should be dictated by the 5 ways of working. So the 5 ways of working are: we must think in the long term, we must have an integrated approach, one that involves people, that's collaborative, and is also looking at prevention. So it's really important to understand that that's a sort of a backdrop, and it's a wider, more holistic way of thinking. It's managed over time to seep its way into something called PAS 2035, which is a new sort of specification stroke standard for organisations to retrofit or introduce energy efficiency into buildings. And I'll go into a lot more detail about that particular standard and what the implications might be. But nevertheless, it's really important to say that in the past we've had a very blunt, blinkered approach to retrofit, where it's all been about carbon, and it hasn't embraced any of the opportunities that retrofit may have sort of given that load of work. Whereas now we've realised that just by looking at carbon alone and just chasing some carbon figures, that actually we've made some big mistakes, and some houses have suffered, and some communities in fact have suffered at the hands of us trying to do the right thing. So for all the right intentions and for all the right sort of rationale, we've tried to do something which we deem to be important, but actually it's not quite worked out that way. So the new way of working has embraced those mistakes, has learned from those mistakes, which means that the way forward is not quite as easy as we might wish it to be, but nevertheless we are managing risk when we're looking at retrofit, and that can only improve the situation and to ensure that the work that we do to our homes is of a better quality and is going to be correct for that particular location. So it's really important to watch each of these initial 10 videos, because there's a flow to them, but hopefully each one will be of a size that you can digest and revisit each of those individually if you so wish. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoy these videos, and thank you to Community Energy Wales for providing us with the resources to make this series happen.